Welcome. My name is Leo Wing, and I'm here with my colleague, Professor Amy Schmitz, and we are really honored to be invited to your outstanding conference. Thank you for joining us. Apologies that this presentation is needing to be translated, that we're not doing it in Spanish or Portuguese, but we're very excited to be connecting with an international audience. We're going to present today on ethical ODR practice, new challenges, principles, and standards. I'm the co-director of the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution, and we have 50 fellows from all over the globe. I'm also a professor in the Legal Studies program at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst in the US.
I'm Amy Schmitz. I'm very pleased also, mucho gusto, to be here and part of this conference. I'm a professor at the University of Missouri in the School of Law in the US and co-chair of the ABA ODR Task Force in the United States. Thank you so much for having us.
So we know, as many people have already begun using video conferencing, they're also thinking more and more about what kind of technology can enhance their alternative dispute resolution practice, whether they're doing arbitration or mediation or engaged in facilitated discussions, negotiation, and courts as well are increasingly using technology, not just because of COVID, but that certainly has escalated the pace at which many people have adopted the use of technology. And we would like to argue today in our brief engagement with you that considering ethics can be very helpful even on the practical level, not just on the moral level, in thinking about how to incorporate technology, how to select what type of technology you may want to use. There are growing numbers of forms of technology to incorporate in your practice, and there frankly are hundreds of tech options and dozens of online dispute resolution providers. So what criteria could you use in order to select the right form of technology? What new risks emerge when you apply technology to dispute handling? And you might ask yourself, how can I reduce those risks in order to optimize the benefits of incorporating technology without increasing liability for yourself or potential harm doing? Of course, none of us want to be engaged in. Well, as of now, there's a growing, robust discussion in the field about how we can handle these challenges, how we can develop best practice, as well as ethical principles and standards. And we offer up that there are two that are being used underway. One is ethical principles for ODR. You can find them at odr.info, our National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution. And those principles have been used as a guidance to develop some standards as well. And you can find them on the International Council for Online Dispute Resolution website, which is icoder.org. I'll also make a pitch now, just in case you're interested. iCoder is an international membership organization for people interested in ODR or involved in ODR practice. And we welcome all of you to consider joining if you're not already a member. So here are the ethical principles for online dispute resolution. And when you take a look at them, you may see so many of them are very familiar to us, those of us that are already practicing or teaching or engaged in the field of dispute resolution. However, each of these are actually designed specifically to address the integration of technology into dispute resolution. So let's just take an example. Let's look at the ODR principle of security. And I want to take a moment to just distinguish the difference between ethical principles and ethical standards in the way that we're using them. When we talk about principles, we're articulating that to mean this kind of larger umbrella, or if we might say another word, is these are the values or the aspirations. And we're trying to think about how we could have a set of ethical principles that could guide the development of software, that could be guiding us as practitioners to consider our practice. How might it need to change when we start incorporating technology? And these can provide what I like to think of as a GPS, a global positioning system, to give us some guidance. as opposed to standards, which are really things that we can use. In effect, they are the floor rather than the larger aspiration. And that would be the baseline of what is acceptable practice that we can hold ourselves and each other accountable to. So let's take a moment to take a look at the ethical principle of security for ODR. All reasonable efforts are made to ensure that the data and the communication between the parties or other entities linked to the ODR processes are secure to the fullest extent of the law, making transparent any unknown limitations. And the ways this could be interpreted according to different sectors of society, whether we're talking about business, or we're talking about court, or we're talking about family mediation, the ways that this could be interpreted based on cultural practices inside of a country or the law and legislation and regulation might be interpreted somewhat differently. So there's an ability for some flexibility in interpretation, but this, we hope, would be a useful aspiration to help guide us. And then if we think about ways that it could be interpreted around a standard, again, the baseline of what's acceptable practice that we can hold ourselves and each other accountable for, then ICODER has interpreted the principles and created a set of standards that I'm going to point to in a minute. And let's look at the one around being secure. So it gives us a directive that ODR providers must ensure that data collected and communications between those engaged in ODR is not shared with any unauthorized parties. Users must be informed of any breaches in a timely manner. So this gives us a very clear directive, as I mentioned. So now we're going to just take a look at the 17 ethical principles have been used to develop these ODR standards. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Amy.
Yeah, so thank you. When we think about standards, we're sort of drilling down, right? And we're getting more specific. And it's funny, I just read an article about kind of a smoky bear, right? Somebody telling you, here are the dangers, here are things you must do, or you really are important with respect to ethics in ODR. And ODR has to be, for example, accessible. I believe accessible is very important, but if we drill down, what does that mean, right? Easy for parties to find and participate in and not limit their right to representation. Well, that can mean a lot of things. That means that it's mobile friendly in most parts of the world. In fact, most people do not have home internet access. So you have to think about broadband as kind of a side. You missed mobile access is what becomes more important for accessibility, but also people with different abilities, right? So how do we have ways to make sure that anyone with different ability levels, regardless of your education, your race, your language, so accessibility in and of itself becomes a really important standard. Each standard, if we unpack the standard, could take an hour. So we won't bore you with that. But truthfully, it's very important for all of us to think very, very deeply about each standard and what that means in our practice as ODR practitioners. Leah, did you want to add anything with respect to these standards?
Yes, thanks. I was just thinking about, as an individual practitioner or someone who's running a program, one of the other things we could think about, building on what Amy mentioned around accessibility, is what happens when two people are having a dispute and you plan to mediate that dispute, and one person's very familiar with the video conferencing platform and the other person has no idea how to use it. So who should be responsible for training both parties to be able to easily participate? How might we keep this in mind as we choose the video conferencing platform, if you want to use video conferencing, just as an example? Does this mean that we charge the parties more who need more time to get skilled up to understand the technology? And if we don't, then practitioners are donating their time. And we may know how to use the technology, but are we good at teaching others how to use it? And another aspect about accessibility that can really impact the process is what happens when someone's Wi-Fi goes out and it's not very strong and they're having a harder time participating. What about our protocol as practitioners? What is our plan about making sure that we pause at that time, or we have a pre-plan about how we'll exit and return back in? So the application of technology can certainly increase the amount and the amount of time we can spend together and the flexibility and the ease with which we can connect without having to all be physically in the same space, just for example. But they also bring in these other dilemmas that sometimes are about inequality in the moment or inequality in the life experience of the people who are participating. So we hope, again, that the ethical principles will give us some guiding light, but that the standards will help us think very critically about what is acceptable practice. So now we'll just show you the other 6 and point you towards where you can see in the bottom the link so that you can hopefully find them useful. We are very fortunate that we have them translated into Spanish. And if anyone would like to volunteer to translate them into Portuguese or any other language, we'd be happy to host them on the iCoder website. Anything else on the standards, Amy, here?
Just that I think you said it very well. I mean, the truth is that each one, they're very rich, right? They're very rich in terms of the things you need to think about under each standard. And I do invite individuals as practitioners, as designers of programs, to think about them very deeply in terms of how that works in their own practice. Another piece of information that's happening now, which I think is very important as we talk about ODR and ethics, is the emergence of artificial intelligence and data analytics. This is really a new area that is just growing by leaps and bounds every day. You know, we hear about robo judges and robo arbitrators, or having decisions that are decided by an algorithm. We hear about algorithms that are deciding whether or not somebody goes to jail or bail. These are all very important aspects to law and justice and peace, which is a theme of this discussion. And so I think it's important for us to raise your awareness of how important artificial intelligence and data analytics has become in ODR itself. Another piece, which I don't think many are aware of, is that the EU is developing the first AI Act. Currently, they are working on, right now, an artificial intelligence act, looking at developing standards and rules around the use of AI. And that use includes AI in the courts and AI in dispute resolution. So I do think it really is an important thing for all of us to think about, because technology is expanding faster than ever during COVID. And in fact, for example, France recently outlawed the use of data analytics when it comes to determining what a judge would likely decide in a case, because of the danger, right? There's danger. There are benefits, most definitely. We can think about the benefits. We think about efficiencies. For example, if we can use AI and machine learning to quickly scan documents and upload those documents into an online dispute resolution system, that would be tremendously efficient. And it could empower self-represented litigants, which is great for expanding access to justice. So don't get me wrong, there are some good things that can happen with AI and machine learning, quite frankly, when it comes to ODR. However, I think it's important to think about the risks, and the risks are very real. There are biases that are baked into the different algorithms that are being used, and we can think about these different solution explorers that tell us, you know, if certain number of events happen, then these are your likely outcomes. But the problem is we don't really have any ethical rules or principles that are currently in place around use of AI. And so I do think there's importance placed upon ODR standards and best practices for AI and data analytics included within this realm that we talk about for ethics, because you want to know that what you're using is explainable, is transparent, whatever that AI might be that is built into any dispute resolution process. Leah, I'm wondering if you have thoughts as well, because I do think that a lot of the ethical standards that you've already discussed do apply with artificial intelligence and data analytics. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts to add with respect to this emerging area.
Well, I was thinking actually about one of the ethical principles, which is informed consent, informed participation, and how crucial it is what Amy just discussed about it being transparent. What is the artificial intelligence being used for? What is the data analytics being used for? What impact could it have or is it having on the process that people are signing up to participate in? And as every program or software developer or program leader is thinking about the incorporating AI into their procedure, this is something that is worth taking a look at and making a concrete decision. It will help you be informed about the practice that you're offering, the limitations, the risks, as I mentioned before, the liability, but also typically, especially in mediation, we like to have people feel informed and empowered. And so in a setting like that, what are ways in which technology is enhancing that, or what ways in which it's constraining that? So there is an ethical principle that asks us to think about informed participation. The other thing I just wanted to mention is, while we have these ethical principles and the ICODER ODR standards, they're really works in progress, because technology is changing very quickly. And also we don't have enough concentration, I would argue, on AI in them. And so therefore, I guess we'll turn next to talk about the ongoing development of best practices and ODR standards. Amy, you want to share a little bit about what we're up to?
Sure, absolutely. I think that's a really good point, though. I just want to sort of building on what you just said. I mean, everything is a work in progress. There's so many things that are yet for us to look at and discuss on the horizon. So I do think acknowledging a work in progress is very important. Currently, yeah, there's collaborations underway with the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution, also with ICODER, and working specifically with the ABA on developing standards and best practices is where we are now. But also, I think what's interesting in just archiving ODR principles, standards, and guidance globally. This is actually a very, very wonderful initiative, which Professor Wing has been really at the forefront of this in developing and grabbing all these different ODR principles, standards, and guidance throughout the world in all different languages. I know one of my students from Brazil has been involved, and we have students in Israel that have been involved in kind of looking at and archiving and develop, like a surgeon going in and looking at, here are things, commonalities with principles and standards and guidance globally, which I think is tremendously helpful and important to the field. Also, again, coming up with drafting ODR standards and guidance. There are working groups happening right now, and I believe this really could make a difference, as having different people working together. And we're looking forward to kind of an end result. But again, it's a work in progress, right? And each and every one of us have to think about what's best for ethics in our internal organizations. And it really brings us full circle to what Professor Wing mentioned at the very start of this conversation, which is, it's in the benefit to every provider and every practitioner to act ethically, because the more you act ethically, the more you build goodwill. And we all know that goodwill builds more clients and brings in more money, right? And so you're doing the right thing and actually bringing in business due to it. And I do believe that's very important and very significant.
I guess the last thing I'd say in closing is, we see this as truly an international effort and a collaboration. So we welcome you. It's so important that we have strong representation from all over the globe, wherever work on ODR is happening, wherever creativity is happening around ODR. So we hope that you'll be in touch. We give you our personal emails in a moment, but I do want to say, this gathering of legislation, regulation, principles, standards, and guidance, we are happy to host on that website any examples from around the world, from membership organizations or from state or regional or federal or national government level. So please be in touch if you're aware of some legislation. We'll take it in the original language. We appreciate having engagement with people from all over the globe. So your participation is very welcome.
I would say gracias and thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much. And please stay safe. We look forward to you being in touch with us. Take care.